All right, so let's jump right into this.
Okay.
We're talking about President-elect Trump's recent statements about U.S. expansion.
Right.
And trust me, this is way more than just typical campaign rhetoric.
Yeah, the thing is, what's really striking is how these pronouncements, are they serious or are they just impulsive? Who knows?
Right.
But they really tap into this very specific, and some might say outdated, thread in American history.
We're talking neo-manifest destiny, right?
Exactly.
That 19th century idea that America was destined to just expand its dominion everywhere, except now it's not just across the continent,
Right.
but potentially across the globe.
Yeah. And to really understand how serious this is, we're going to be looking at a collection of news articles and some online discussions
Okay.
that are analyzing Trump's comments about Panama, Greenland, even Canada.
Wow. So by the end of this deep dive,
Yeah.
you'll understand not just what he's saying, but what the potential implications are for U.S. foreign policy and global stability.
It's exactly.
We'll be dissecting these statements, looking at the historical context, the potential motivations, and even looking at the different perspectives on whether this is a calculated strategy or just political theater.
Okay, let's start with the Panama Canal.
Okay.
Trump claims Panama is charging the U.S. exorbitant rates for using it,
Right.
even suggesting that the U.S. should just demand its return.
It's a pretty bold statement, especially considering that the U.S. handed over control of the canal to Panama back in 1999.
Yeah.
But I think this goes beyond just the cost of using the canal.
Okay, so Panama's president was very quick to respond,
Yes.
saying that the canal is not negotiable and that no foreign power has control over it.
Yeah, that sharp rebuttal, I think, might be about more than just sovereignty.
Okay.
Remember, the U.S. actually occupied Panama for decades in the early 20th century.
Right.
So there's a lot more historical baggage here.
So even bringing this up is probably going to touch a nerve.
Absolutely. For Panama, this isn't just about a waterway.
It's about their hard-won autonomy and resisting what they might perceive as a new wave of U.S. imperialism.
And this is where that neo-manifest destiny idea really comes into play, right?
It does. Trump even tweeted this image of the U.S. flag flying over the canal, which some analysts are saying is a pretty deliberate attempt to evoke that expansionist imagery.
Right, but some people are saying this is all just a distraction tactic.
Right.
Trump loves to dominate headlines.
He does.
So is he just using this to shift focus away from other issues?
I mean, that's definitely one interpretation.
Yeah.
You know, classic Trump make a bold, even outrageous statement,
Right.
and then just watch everyone scramble to react.
But what if it's more calculated?
Okay.
What if this is a pressure tactic to renegotiate the terms of use for the canal?
It's possible. By making an extreme demand, he then sets the stage for what appears to be a compromise later on.
So even if he doesn't actually want to take back the canal,
Right.
he could use this as leverage in other areas.
Yeah.
Maybe even beyond Panama.
Exactly. And that's what makes understanding his motives so crucial.
Right.
Is this a genuine desire for expansion? Is it a negotiating ploy? Or just a way to project an image of strength on the world stage?
It's hard to say for sure, but if we look at his actions across different countries, we might be able to pick up on some patterns.
Let's shift our focus north to Canada. While Panama evokes these historical tensions, Trump's approach here seems to be more about contemporary economic and political leverage.
Okay.
It's a really interesting case.
All right, let's dive in.
Trump's comments about Canada, they've definitely taken a different tone.
Right.
Less about historical claims and more about, I guess you could say, political maneuvering with a touch of humor,
Yeah.
even if it is at Canada's expense.
He's joked about Canada just becoming the 51st state, even calling Prime Minister Trudeau governor.
Right.
And there was that image he shared,
Yes.
kind of mocking the idea of Canada joining the U.S.
It definitely got people talking, and it's interesting how Canadians have responded.
Yeah.
Some are genuinely concerned, while others are just using humor and sarcasm to kind of fire back.
I saw some really funny memes online.
Oh, yeah.
Some Canadians were even saying they'd be open to joining the U.S.
Right.
But mostly for the economic benefits, not so much for the political reasons.
Yeah, that economic aspect is key.
Yeah.
The U.S. and Canada have a really intertwined economic relationship.
Right.
Any change to that could have huge effects on both sides of the border.
But let's be real, nobody's actually taking the 51st state thing seriously.
It's highly improbable.
Yeah.
But these jokes do raise some questions about the current dynamic between the U.S. and Canada.
Right.
Is there some kind of underlying tension or disrespect, maybe masked by humor?
Especially since Trump has made other provocative statements about Canada,
Right.
criticizing their border security and even threatening tariffs on their goods.
If we look at the bigger picture, I think it suggests that these pronouncements could be a tactic to put pressure on Canada,
Okay.
using these outrageous statements as leverage to maybe gain an advantage in other areas.
So maybe there's more to these jokes than we initially thought.
Possibly.
It's almost like that negotiating tactic we talked about with Panama.
Yeah, definitely some parallels there.
Right.
Create a stir with an extreme position and then use that to bargain for something more favorable later on.
So from Panama to Canada, we're seeing these power plays that could be more strategic than they seem.
Exactly.
All right, so let's move on to Greenland. Now, this one feels a bit more connected to that neo-manifest destiny idea.
Greenland is where the historical context of American expansionism becomes super relevant.
Okay.
Remember when Trump wanted to buy Greenland during his first term?
Yeah.
Well, he's brought it up again, saying that it's absolutely necessary for U.S. national security.
And Greenland being a Danish territory with all those natural resources like
Yeah.
oil, gas, and those rare earth minerals seems to fit into that whole expansionist mindset.
It's like a modern-day gold rush, but in the Arctic.
Exactly. But how serious is he about this? Is this a genuine belief in Greenland's strategic importance, or is this more about just projecting power?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
To answer that, we need to look at all the different interpretations of Trump's actions.
Okay, so we've got some experts who say this is all theatrics, attention-grabbing to distract and dominate headlines.
Right, and then you have others who think it's a more calculated strategy.
Okay.
They say these are all part of a complex negotiation tactic,
Right.
pushing for extreme positions so he can eventually get something more favorable.
And then there are those who are genuinely worried,
Yes,
seeing these statements as evidence of a more aggressive foreign policy approach.
that's a valid concern.
Yeah.
These pronouncements really tap into that historical narrative of American exceptionalism
Yeah.
and a belief that the country has the right to exert its influence globally, sometimes through force.
And that's where things get really unsettling,
It does.
especially for countries that have a history of U.S. intervention.
Absolutely. It creates this sense of fear and distrust, potentially damaging diplomatic efforts
Yeah.
and hindering international cooperation.
So what does this mean for the average person who's just trying to understand all of this? It feels like we're constantly on edge, just waiting for the next shocking statement or tweet.
It's definitely a challenging time to stay informed, but I think that's why it's so important to think critically.
Yeah.
Don't just take these pronouncements at face value.
Okay.
Dig deeper. Do some research on the historical context. Think about the motivations and potential consequences,
Right.
and then form your own conclusions.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
We need to be aware of the different interpretations and not just get swept up in the hype or the fear.
Exactly, because whether these are carefully thought out strategies, impulsive rhetoric, or a mix of both,
Yeah.
they have the power to really shape the world.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive, from the Panama Canal to Canada and now Greenland.
We have.
And while we don't have all the answers, we have a much better understanding of what might be motivating President-elect Trump
I think so.
and the potential consequences of his actions.
Absolutely. And it's going to be fascinating to see how this all unfolds in the coming months and years.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex and constantly changing situation.
It is. But one thing's for sure, the world is definitely watching and the stakes are high.
Okay, so we've gone from the Panama Canal all the way to Canada and now even Greenland.
Right.
Each situation is kind of unique,
They are.
but they all come back to this question.
Yeah.
Is there actually like a plan behind all of these statements, or is this just like impulsive rhetoric?
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
If we think about that attention-grabbing theory,
Yeah.
it does seem pretty consistent with how Trump uses media.
Right.
He knows how to create a spectacle,
Mm.
you know, dominate those headlines, and maybe even shift attention away from other stuff.
He's always going to be making headlines, right?
Exactly. It
Like,
keeps everyone guessing.
gosh.
And on edge? Yeah. But what's kind of scary is how this all plays out when it comes to international relations.
Right.
This isn't just business deals anymore.
Yeah.
There's some really complex geopolitical dynamics at play.
And there could be some pretty big global consequences.
Exactly.
So even if these statements are just meant to be provocative,
Right.
it could really mess up diplomacy.
Absolutely. And that's why we've got to think about those other perspectives, too.
Yeah.
Let's look at that negotiating tactic theory.
Yeah.
If we say that these extreme positions are just bargaining chips,
Okay.
it brings up a whole bunch of new questions.
Like, what is he actually trying to get out of this?
Exactly. What are those end goals?
Yeah.
And what is he willing to give up to get them?
So with the Panama Canal, for example,
Yeah.
does he actually want to take it back?
Right.
Or is this a way to get Panama to give in on something else?
Exactly, like maybe some trade deals or
Yeah.
security cooperation.
Okay, and with Canada then, could those jokes about annexation be a way to get a better deal in NAFTA negotiations or something?
Maybe. By creating uncertainty
Right.
and that sense of possible disruption,
Yeah.
he might be trying to strong-arm other countries into making deals that benefit the U.S. more.
But there are those who are genuinely worried,
There are.
taking these statements as a sign of a really aggressive foreign policy.
It's a valid concern. These statements play into that historical narrative of American exceptionalism
Right.
and the belief that the U.S. has this right to be in everyone's business,
Right.
to exert its influence all over the globe, even if it means using force.
And that's where things get really scary.
Definitely, especially for countries that have been on the receiving end of U.S. intervention in the past.
Right. It just creates fear and distrust.
It does.
It could really damage diplomatic efforts and make international cooperation a lot harder.
Yeah.
So for the average person out there just
Yeah.
trying to make sense of all of this, it feels like we're always waiting for that next shocking statement.
Right.
Or the next crazy tweet.
It is a tough time to stay informed, but that's exactly why critical thinking is so crucial.
It is.
Don't just take what you hear at face value.
Right.
Really dig deeper.
Yeah.
Do your own research. Look at the history behind it all.
Yeah.
Think about those motivations and the possible consequences.
Okay.
And then you can form your own conclusions.
That's really good advice. We can't get caught up in all the hype or
Right.
let the fear take over.
Exactly. Whether these pronouncements are carefully planned strategies, off-the-cuff remarks, or somewhere in between,
Yeah.
they have the power to change the world as we know it.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the Panama Canal to Canada and even Greenland.
Yeah.
We might not have all the answers.
No, but we've learned a lot about the potential reasons behind President-elect Trump's actions
Yeah.
and what the consequences might be.
It's a complicated situation, and it's changing all the time.
It is, but one thing's for sure. Everyone's watching, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into U.S. expansion.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a fascinating discussion, and hopefully it's given you some things to think about as we move forward into this new and uncertain era.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.